Usuli, Usulis Arabic, Estawlin Persian, Estawlin are the majority Twelver Shi'a Muslim group. They differ from their now much smaller rival Akhbari group in favoring the use of ijtihad, i.e. reasoning, in the creation of new rules of fiqh, in assessing hadith to exclude traditions they believe unreliable, and in considering it obligatory to obey a mujtahid when seeking to determine Islamically correct behavior. Since the crushing of the Akhbaris in the late 18th century, it has been the dominant school of Twelver Shia and now forms an overwhelming majority within the Twelver Shia denomination. The name Usuli derives from the term Usul al-fiqh, principles of jurisprudence. In Usuli thought, there are four valid sources of law: the Quran, hadith, Ijma, and aql. Ijma refers to a unanimous consensus. Aql, in Shia jurisprudence, is applied to four practical principles which are applied when other religious proofs are not applicable: 284-5 bara'at immunity, ihtiyat recommended precautions, takhyir selection, and istishab the presumption of continuity in the previous state. The term Usuli is also sometimes used to refer more generally to students of Usul, especially among early Muslims, without regard to Shia Islam. Students/scholars of the principles of fiqh are distinguished from scholars of fiqh itself, whose scholars are known as faqih plural fuqaha. Background: the Usuli believe that the hadith collections contained traditions of varying degrees of reliability. In contrast, the Akhbari believe that the sole sources of law are the Quran and the hadith, in particular the four books accepted by the Shia. Everything in these sources is in principle reliable, and outside them there was no authority competent to enact or deduce further legal rules. In addition to assessing the reliability of the hadith, Usuli believes the task of the legal scholar is to establish intellectual principles of general application, Usul, al-fiqh, from which particular rules may be derived by way of deduction. Accordingly, Usuli legal scholarship has the tools in principle for resolving new situations that are not already addressed in Quran or hadith. See ijtihad. Taqlid. An important tenet of Usuli doctrine is taqlid, or imitation, i.e. the acceptance of a religious ruling in matters of worship and personal affairs from someone regarded as a higher religious authority, e.g. alim, without necessarily asking for the technical proof. These higher religious authorities can be known as a source of imitation: Arabic marja taqlid, a marja tiqulid, Persian marja, or less exaltedly as an imitated one, Arabic emqulad muqallad. However, his verdicts are not to be taken as the only source of religious information, and he can be always corrected by other muqalladin, the plural of muqallad, which come after him. Obeying a deceased taqlid is forbidden in Usuli. A 225 taqlid has been introduced by scholars who felt that Quranic verses and traditions were not enough, and that ulama were needed not only to interpret the Quran and Sunnah but to make new rulings to respond. History. By their debates and books, al-Mufid, Sayyid al-Murtada, and Sheikh el-Tusi in Iraq were the first to introduce the Usul al-fiqh, principles of Islamic jurisprudence, under the influence of the Shafi'i and Mu'tazili doctrines. Al-Kilani in Ray and al-Sadaq in Qom were concerned with a traditionalist approach. The second wave of the Usuli was shaped in the Mongol period, when al-Hili introduced the term mujtahid, meaning an individual qualified to deduce ordinances on the basis of authentic religious arguments. By developing the theory of the Usul, al-Hili introduced more legal and logical norms which extended the meaning of the Usul beyond the four principal sources. Amali was the first scholar to fully formulate the principles of ijtihad. These traditional principles of Shia jurisprudence were challenged by the 17th century Akhbari school, led by Mohammed Amin al-Istarabadi. A reaction against Akhbari arguments was led in the last half of the 18th century by Mohammed Bakir Behbahani. At 284-285 he attacked the Akhbari and their method was abandoned by Shia. At 230, the dominance of the Usuli over the Akhbari came when Baybahani led the Usuli to dominance and completely routed the Akhbaris at Karbala and Najaf, so that only a handful of Shi'a ulama have remained Akhbari to the present day. 127.